Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Ghar Se Museum. We're very, very happy to have you join us, and happy International Museums Day to everyone. Today we have a wonderful session from the Partition Museum. I hope at least some of you have visited the Partition Museum. They are one of 10 museums that we have collaborated with at the ArtX company to bring together the Ghar Se Museum series. The series ran over 2 days, yesterday and today. We have several other sessions that are happening over the day, and you will be able to find information on that in the chat box, which should appear on the right side of your screen. We'll keep sharing information at the beginning of the session and at the end of the session, so you can look at that and discover other information as well about the series. Today we have Ganeev Kaur Dhillon, who is a curator of exhibitions at the Partition Museum. She is involved in research and curating the museum's exhibitions, collecting oral histories, and building the museum's archives. Ganeev's full bio will also be available in the chat session. Just a couple of hygiene points. If you'd like to ask questions, and we really do encourage you to ask questions of Ganeev and of the presentation that you're about to see, please look for the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. And Ganeev will answer questions based on what you send to her, and she will answer them verbally. So do please, through the session, please share your questions and comments, and she will respond to them in the Q&A section after she finishes the presentation. So Ganeev, I invite you now to turn on your video and to come on screen. Hi. Welcome. So give me just a few seconds. Let me turn on your presentation. And if you could just give a very quick intro about what this session is about, and why this Women in Voices came about Women's Voices from the Partition, why this exhibition was put together, while I get things going.
So just before we start, I'd like to just briefly introduce you to the Partition Museum. It's the first physical space that is dedicated specifically and only to the history of the partition. It opened in August 2017, 70 years after partition. It's located in the historic Town Hall building in Amritsar, on the way to and very close to the Golden Temple and Jallianwala Bagh. It's walking distance from there. So if you do go to Amritsar, please do visit the museum. It's of course closed right now, but we hope to open whenever everything opens up. The partition of India is of course a key defining event of the Indian subcontinent. Up to 18 million people were affected. Up to 1 million people lost their lives. A lot of work has been done on the partition. Much has been written. Scholars have worked on it over the past many decades now and looked at it from different angles and viewpoints. Today's talk will be focusing on the experience of the women during the partition. And please do note that some of these stories are disturbing, so just keep that in mind. Can we start?
Yes.
That's the building. It's the historic Town Hall building in Amritsar, and we are located on the wing to the right-hand side of this. Can we move on? So as I said, we'll be speaking about the experience of the women. And it's a story that is often ignored, often forgotten. It's true for women's history, the women's experiences throughout history. And again, work is now being done to recover it. Next slide. Many scholars have been working on it. The seminal works have been by Urvashi Bhutalia, Ritu Menon, and Kamla Bhasin. It's been continued by other researchers in recent times. But even now, women's stories continue to be at the edges. At the Partition Museum, when we were recording histories, we realized that people would invite us home and they would be thinking about their grandfathers or the male members of the family to speak with us. And while we'd be recording, we'd realize that, you know, even their wives or their sisters-in-law, they were also people who had lived through the partition. And it was only when we asked them that, oh, did you also come across and migrate during the partition, that they would say yes, and you know, consider themselves to be a part of this recording, this archiving. Women generally are also not as forthcoming, especially from that generation. They're not used to speaking publicly or sharing with strangers, as opposed to men who are much more comfortable doing it. They think the information that they have is not as important, you know, that they don't have information about what was happening politically outside the home. And it's interesting because even the men that we are interviewing today were children at that time. A lot of their knowledge is knowledge that they have gained over the years, and now they think about it in retrospect and place it into the information that they had in 1947 or what they experienced in 1947. Women don't tend to do that. So I just like to share a story that, you know, we had interviewed these two men from the same family, and they were both children at that time. And they spoke about the fact that they had Muslim neighbors, and as children, they would visit and play with the children there. And just before we were wrapping up, after about 3.5, 4 hours, there's no lady sitting there, and we asked her if she was also from the family and if she had come across at the partition. It turned out she was the elder sister-in-law. She had been married into the family before 1947. She was in her early 90s, but she wasn't very forthcoming. She didn't want to talk in the beginning. It was only when everybody else moved away, the rest of the family moved away, that she, you know, moved closer to me and then started speaking. And one of the things that she shared was that that as women, they maintained a strict parda. They did not go out of the house. And I asked her if she, you know, since the children played with the children of the Muslim neighbors and the men were friends with them, if the women also interacted. And she said no, that as they maintained parda, they didn't really go out. But on the day that they were leaving, she said, as they were sitting in the tonga, these Muslim women who also maintained strict parda came out and handed cooked food to this family, to the women of this family, and said that we know that, you know, you don't eat food that has been cooked by Muslims, but you are going on a long, hard journey. You don't know what to expect. So please take this. You have children with you. And this is a story that could only have been shared by a woman. This was not shared by the two men whom I had already interviewed by then. And this is not a story that would have happened to the men of the family. So, you know, it's just these stories that are also important to record, also important to realize. Next slide. We'll just play a short clip from with Hamida Begum. It's just one of the many interviews that we have done with women that are in the Partition Museum's archive. Hamida Begum migrated from West Bengal to East Bengal, East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and we'll just hear that. It's just a short clip of a minute. I can't hear the voice. Sorry, the voice is still not.
আমাদের মালদাতে রাইট হইলো তখনই বুঝতে ইন্ডিয়ান পাকিস্তান যখন হইলো তখন বললাম লোক ভাবছে কেন এটা করছে তখন জানি কি পাকিস্তান হচ্ছে 3 দিন তো পাকিস্তান ছিল আমার শ্বশুর বাড়ির মকদুমপুর নদীর ধারে একেবারে ওটা ওখানে হইলো ওখানে রাত দিন লাগিয়ে দিল আমরা থাকতে পেলাম না এক হিন্দুর বাড়ি ধোবার বাড়ি চুপ করে থাকলাম থাকলে তখন আমরা মনে করে চলে গেলাম ফের আমি আমার পিরিজপুর চলে গেলাম পিরিজপুর সব এখানে পার হইলাম তখন আমার দুটো মেয়ে মেয়ে হয়নি 2 মেয়ে তখনকার মনে করে আমরা ভোলাহাটে যখন আইলাম নার্সারিতে এলাম নার্সারিতে এসে তখন কুরবানির দিন আছে নার্সারিতে এলাম নার্সারিতে এসে তখন মনে করে কুরবানির দিন পড়লো যা লাগে আইকন দিল তেল থেকে লবণ থেকে গোস্ত থেকে মাছ যত কিছু লাগে হাঁড়ি পাতিল যত কিছু লাগে সব মাটি দিল। আচ্ছা রান্না রান্না খাইলে মানে ই আছে না মহিলা কলেজ, হ্যাঁ ওটা হলো গোডাউন, হ্যাঁ কলেজ পরে হেলছে। আচ্ছা ওই জায়গায় এসে ওখানে আমরা উঠিনি, অন্যজন উঠেছে। আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আমি যখন আমরা তো টিকে পাড়া ভাড়াতে গেলাম।
Now, this is one story that is, just an interview with this lady. But the stories that about the migration, of how they migrated and restarted their lives, but the stories that women hold are much more private, difficult to talk about. There was the fear of abduction, there was the fear of rape, there was the fear of honor killings by members of their own families, of being left alone without any support if all the male members died, of rebuilding their lives, how would they restart their lives. And many of the women that we're interviewing today, again, as I mentioned, were children at that time. And they did not face the full brunt of the trauma that their mothers would have faced. But they still carried the scars. Death was near, death was a reality, and death could come at the hands of really close family members. And that is something that they had to wrap their heads around and accept and move on with life. Please play the video, the next video.
नवा बनया सी नवे दरवाजे बाहर उत्थे सुनिया कि कोई मुस्लिम लीडर मुल्ला मान की कहते सन उसको वो आ रहा है तकरीबन घर दी बिल्डिंग के थल्ले ऑफिस सी मेरे फादर का वो एकदम जो उन्होंने सुनिया ते ऊपर आ गए। मैं तो मेरी मदर ही मेरी और बहन भरा कोई मतलब ब्रदर है सिस्टर कोई नहीं सी ते मेरा ब्रदर ते मेरे फादर थल्ले ऑफिस ही सी। फादर मेरे ऊपर आए थे पेट्रोल का कैन लैके नाल माचिस लैके तो कहने लगे कि तुसी अगर कुछ गड़बड़ हो जाती तो तुसी आपने जला लेना तो ये नहीं कि उन मुसलमानों के हाथों में ना मेरी मदर के हाथ में कह देगी मदर के बड़े हौसले में से तो मैं बड़ा रोई उसमें मैं कह रही आपनों आप किस तरह मारांगे।
This trauma is one of the many things that is never spoken about later. The knowledge that the people that they trusted the most would rather see them dead to understand this as a child at that point of time. In another interview that we did, this lady said that, until that point, we had always been told that life was sacrosanct, that you do not take life. And now suddenly we were told that, if we are attacked, we should kill ourselves, we should jump off a building. And that was more important, that there was something that was more important than life. And these things were never really spoken about later. It was that it happened and then it was just put away and not discussed at all. Next slide. The women often were told and often ended up being killed by their own family members. They were either shot or beheaded. They committed suicide by setting themselves on fire, by jumping into wells, by jumping off buildings, consuming an overdose of opium, as opium was fairly easily available in the rural countries. This is a photograph of one of the galleries in the Partition Museum, and it references one of the most known incidents from that time, from March 1947, at a village called Thua Khalsa near Rawalpindi, in which more than 80 women jumped into a well. We'll just play an audio clip with a man called Veer Bahadur Singh, who was there and who witnessed it. I'm sorry that I don't have subtitles for that, but it's just a 1-minute clip. Just play the audio, please.
सबसे पहले अपनी लड़की को, मेरी बहन को, जब ऐसे लाए, यहाँ मेरा फादर खड़े हैं, मैं उनके पास ऐसे खड़ा हूँ, तो उसको कृपान मारने लगे। ऐसे जब मारने लगे तो उसका ये हट गया। तो फिर मेरी सिस्टर ने अपने हाथ से यूं किया और मेरे फादर ने यूं किया, मारी कृपान और वो गर्दन उधर चली गई। इस तरह 28 लड़कियां मेरे फादर ने मेरे सामने मारी। उसके मारने के बाद फिर वहां एक कुआं है, उस कुएं के ऊपर सब इकट्ठे जब हो गए तो मुसलमानों ने कहा कि तुम मुसलमान बनो। तो फिर जस्टिस वो संत गुलाब सिंह एडवोकेट जो अभी 5-7 साल ही हुए वो स्वर्गवास हो गए हैं, उनकी बीवी ने कहा कि हम पानी पीना चाहते हैं। तो वो कुएं में इकट्ठे होके मेरे सामने वहां प्रेयर की परमात्मा के सामने कि हे गुरु गोबिंद सिंह साहब, जब तक हम जिंदा रहे हैं खालसा पंथ की आन और शान को कायम रखा है, सिक्खी को मतलब हमने वो बट्टा नहीं लगने दिया है। तो अब सिक्खी खतरे में है, हम कुएं में छलांग मार रही हैं। तो 84 लेडीज बच्चे और उन्होंने कुएं में छलांग मार दी। एक औरत ऐसी थी जिसके 6 बच्चे थे, बसंत कौर उसका नाम था, अरजित सिंह धीर की वो वाइफ थी। वो उसने कई बार छलांग लगाई, 6 बच्चे उसके कुएं में दब चुके थे, मर चुके थे, पर वो बार बार कुएं में जाती थी, फिर निकल आती थी क्योंकि कुआं भर चुका था।
So this is Veer Bahadur Singh. And now the 2 points that strike here. One is that, you know, while the incident of the women jumping into the wells is fairly well known, it is still something that has been memorialized in different films. There's an iconic scene that is from Tamas where women jump into a well with a lot of, you know, they're shown doing this with a lot of determination and clarity and a religious fervor. It's shown in Khamosh Pani, and it has entered into sort of the knowledge of partition. But what Veer Bahadur Singh in fact starts with is that his father and 2 other people from the village killed 28 of the young girls from their family so that they would not end up being abducted. And that's a part of the history that is even more forgotten, never really spoken about, because it strikes at the very heart of what constitutes a family, right? And the other thing is that the lady that he speaks about right towards the end, Basant Kaur, who jumps into the well again and again, and she is unable to kill herself because the well is so full of bodies that she can't commit suicide, is in fact his own mother. And he's talking about her in, you know, in a number of interviews that he's done, and Urvashi Butalia in her book, The Other Side of Silence, also mentions this, that he speaks about it as a third person. He never refers to it that my mother jumped. And he, as a young boy, stood there with his younger brother and witnessed first his father killing his sister and cousins and other girls of the village. Then he witnessed his mother trying to commit suicide and 80 other women jump into a well. And he mentions when Andrew Whitehead asks him that, did you not feel that you also had to kill yourself? And he says, no, we were boys. We did not have to do this. So there is a clear realization that, you know, as a woman, your honor was located, your honor, and as well as the honor of the family, of this community, of the society, was located in your body, and you could not, you had to, you know, kill yourselves. Next slide. There is no list, no record of these women who ended up committing suicide or being killed by their family members. And this is actually a rare example of a memorial tablet which gives us the names of these women. This is located at the Golden Temple, and it's in memory of the people who died at one village, Pulerchak, number 118 of Zila Shekhupura in present-day Pakistan. And the first line starts by saying that women who, for the sake of saving their honor, were shot or killed with a sword by their husbands, brothers, fathers, or sons. I've translated the list of the names here, and if you look at it, you can see that, you know, it is all the female members of a family who are being killed. So the wife and daughter of Dr. Virsa Singh, the wife, daughter, sister of Amar Singh Ladla, the mother, wife, and sisters of Balwant Singh Patia. There are 18 names here. Below that are 19 further names of women and children who killed themselves, who committed suicide by jumping into the village well. And that's followed by a total list of 240 names of the people who died in the village on that day while trying to get away, while trying to defend the village, as well as on the during the migration later. This plaque was put up by Dr. Virsa Singh, Dr. Virsa. His is the first name, his wife and daughter's names are the first names on this list. Next slide. Now, coming to the women who were abducted. Amrita Preetham has written the book Pinjar that was also made into a film. And I've shared an extract from the book, which says Puro's thoughts, who has been abducted by Rashid. And she tries going back to her family, who does not welcome her back because she's lost her honor, and it's better for them to assume that she's been killed. And Puro goes around the village and she gathers strays. She is kind to and becomes a friend to a woman who's lost her mental imbalance and who wanders the village. When that woman ends up being raped, and when she has a child, Puro tries to adopt the child, but the child is taken away from her, that she, on the basis of religion. And she talks about that. She addresses that feeling that she has no one to call her own. The only person with whom she had a relationship, the only person that she could call her own, was her abductor, Rashid. And as a human, you always look to build relationships. You always look to move forward. You try and build what you can around yourself. Next. And the same is reflected in a short story by the famous Punjabi writer Kulwant Singh Virk's story, Khabbal, in which the narrator goes to Pakistan. He's trying to recover women who have been abducted. He finds this woman, but is unable to get her out. She refuses to leave with him. She's lost all hope. And just before he is leaving her, she turns to him and says that, help me get my husband's younger sister, who has also been abducted by people from a neighboring village. And he says, you help me recover her and help me get her to me. She's not even saying take her back to the family or to take her to India. She's saying, get my sister-in-law to me. I had raised her. She is my own daughter. And at the end, she says, I shall then have relatives and someone to call my own. And you realize that these are the circumstances in which these women found themselves, and they tried to rebuild their lives, restart their lives. There were many forces, many emotions at play. What other options did they have? They had to consider that. For a society that preferred that the women should have been killed or should have committed suicide rather than being caught by members of the other community, this was one way for them to move forward and just try and build their own relationships anew. Next slide. Now, India and Pakistan started very early on discussing the issue of abducted women. The first talk started in September 1947 itself, and on December 6, 1947, the plans were put in motion to recover women. About 15,000 women were finally recovered from India and Pakistan. The actual number of abducted women would, of course, have been much higher. Now, if you look at the definition of who was an abducted person, it was defined as any male child under the age of 16 and any woman living with a man of a different religion after March 1st, 1947, which is when violence broke out first in Punjab. So women had no choice and they had no agency. Boys of 16 or 17 could decide for themselves, but a woman of any age could not. For her, her religion was decided at birth, and on the basis of that religion, she would have to move either to Pakistan or to India. Next slide. So Shaheed-e-Mohabbat, which was the poster on the previous slide, is based off a true story of Bhuta Singh and Zainab. Zainab is recovered and taken back to Pakistan by force, even though by then she's had a child with Bhuta Singh. And it's based off a true story. Another story that was shared first by Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed in the public domain is of Harpajan Kaur, who later became Shehnaz, and then Harpajan Kaur again. Harpajan Kaur had married in 1946. She and her husband lived in Rajasthansi, which is very close to the India-Pakistan border, very close to Amritsar. And in 1947, they were on a truck trying to reach Amritsar away from the violence when the truck was attacked. Her husband was killed and she was abducted. She finally ended up marrying a man called Afzal Khan, who was 16 years her senior, and she moved to Karachi with him, and she had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. In 1962, she managed to get a visa to visit her parents in Amritsar. So she, with her husband Afzal and two of her youngest children, she came to visit her parents. But when she came back, they refused to let her go. Afzal Khan moved the courts at Amritsar to allow him to take his wife back. The court said that he could take his children, but not Harbhajan Kaur. In 1969, she was married to a man called Gurbachan Singh, who already had two sons from previous marriage. His first wife had died. And so Harbhajan Kaur brought up those two children. In 2007, after Gurbachan Singh died, his younger son, Romi Singh, he reached out to his stepmother, and he had found out that she had been married earlier, that she had had a family in Pakistan. And he asked her if she would like to try and find that family. In 2012, she finally agreed. She thought about it a lot. In 2012, she agreed. And Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed was closely involved in this process. He, put it out he wrote articles about it in English and in Urdu. And in April 2013, she finally managed to meet her children after 50 years. And, again, the fact is that if you look at how, when this recovery of abducted women laws were passed, nobody thought of what would happen to the children. There was an argument put forward that the children should belong to the mother because, that relationship was primary, and if the couple was being separated, then the children should go with the mother. But families were not willing to accept children from the marriages that had taken place earlier, and even when they were willing to accept back the women. So the children that were not wanted, they had gone back with Afzal Khan. And even in 2013, when Romi and his mother, Harbhajan Kaur, go to Karachi, they cross the border at Wagah, Romi Singh says that he did not tell their relatives in India that they were going to Pakistan. Even after 50 years, this aspect, while acceptable to him, to his mother, would not have been acceptable to the larger family, perhaps. Next slide. A similar story shared from the other side. Kaisar Tufail visited India from Pakistan. He was visiting his mother's village, and he had heard from his mother that one of the girls from the extended family had been abducted just as they were leaving. And he asked about her from the family that they were sitting with in India, and they put out they asked around in the village, and it turned out that they found and met Surinder Kaur, who was the daughter of Rahmat Bibi, who had been abducted. And Rahmat had ended up marrying the kidnappers, her abductor's son. She had 5 daughters. And her brother, Rahmat's brother, Ibrahim, had come back to India in the 1950s to try and convince her to go to Pakistan with him. Now, at that time, she had refused because she had already married. She had 5 daughters, which she did not want to leave the daughters behind. If she had gone to Pakistan, would she have been accepted? How much would she have been accepted? She had rebuilt her life. And to leave all that and to go, she chose not to go with her brother. Now, when Kaisar Tufail met Surinder Kaur, the daughter of Rahmat Bibi, he told her that, her Mamu, her Mamaji, Ibrahim, was still alive, and he would try and put her in touch with him. But when Mr. Tufail went back to Pakistan and reached out to Ibrahim, Ibrahim did not have any interest in being in touch with his sister's children, because what he said was that, I have grandchildren, granddaughters of my own to get married. And that shows that even now, even today, 70 years after the partition, that dishonor associated with the fact that you had, that these women, that somebody from your family had been abducted, is now in the other country, is something that continues to affect the relationships. So unfortunately, Surinder Kaur is not in touch with her family in Pakistan. Next slide. On the Bengal side, the story of partition is very different. from Punjab. For one thing, the movement in Punjab, the migrations were compressed into one year of 1947, while on the eastern side, it's been much more spread out over many years, many decades almost. The violence was much more intense in Punjab, much less so in Pakistan. And even the concept of the border is something that has changed on the eastern side. So you had the 1905 partition, then you had 1947, then you had 1971. But to the extent of the violence faced by women, it is the same. Women embodied the honor of the community, and there were the similar forces at play. One of the books written on the violence on the East faced by the women is Epar Ganga, Opar Ganga by Jyotirmoyi Devi. It's about a Hindu girl who's been, who loses her family. She's then taken in by a Muslim family, lives with them for a few months, who take care of her, and then she goes to her brother's home in Calcutta. But she's never really accepted fully back into the family. Next slide. Now, woman could not really choose her place of residence. And this particularly affected Muslim women because when partition took place, if you were married, you had to move to the country that your husband moved to. So if a Muslim man chose Pakistan, a Muslim, his wife, who might have the rest of the family choosing to remain in India, had no option but to move to Pakistan with him because she would be considered a Pakistani. And often when marriages broke up, or when the women ended up being widowed and then not being taken care of by their husbands' families, and the rest of the support group was in India, they could not return to India as Indian citizens. They would come back on visas, and then they would be continuously harassed for overstaying their visas. And one way out for them to then become full citizens of India was to remarry Indian citizens. Wazira Fazila Yaqub Ali Zamindar has done a lot of work on this. So her book, The Long Partition, is a good place to start to look more into this. The film Mammo was written by the scriptwriter Khalid Muhammad, who also wrote Zubeda. It's based on the true story of his grandmother's sister, Mahmooda Begum, who ultimately, who had come back to India after her husband dies in Pakistan, but is harassed. She's deported to Pakistan. She comes back again many years later, and then she pretends that she has died in India so as to not be troubled by the state anymore. Next slide. We'll just go through a few artworks that have been done. This first one is by Krishan Khanna. Now, women were often sent ahead to the extent possible, and crossed over, like sent ahead from India to Pakistan or from Pakistan to India before the violence became really bad, while people still thought that things might improve, and then the family, the women and children could come back to their homes, while the men stayed on continuing with their work and taking care of the properties. So this is a scene made by witnessed by Krishan Khanna at the Ambala station, where he said that the trains would often be late. You did not know if your family members would be on that train or not, and families would just be sitting on the station waiting for a train to arrive, not knowing what was really happening. Next slide. Next slide, please. This is the work by, sorry, the previous one. This is by Satish Gujral. He was closely involved in helping refugees cross the borders. He himself crossed the borders a few times, helping people come across. The next one, the next slide is by S.L. Parashar. S.L. Parashar was the camp commandant at Ambala. He was earlier the vice principal at Mayo College of Arts in Lahore, and seeing the scenes around him was overwhelming, and he ultimately started just sketching what he was seeing in front of him on any piece of paper that he found, and these are some of those works. And what you see in this painting in this sketch as well as in the previous one is a very common idea, is a very common depiction of women huddled together, sitting together for support. It's largely women just coming together. It's a very familiar scene. P.N. Margot has also done a painting on it called Morning. Next slide. These are two objects carried by women when they came across. The first on the left is a Fulkari coat that was brought across by Pritam Kaur. She was a young girl of 19 or 20, and she was sent ahead by her parents on a train with a younger brother. And for a young girl, this was one of her most prized possessions. So she brought this with her. The sari on the left is a Dhakai sari. This was donated to the museum by Bakul Chanda. It was gifted to her at her wedding by her mother-in-law in 1951 in Komila in East Pakistan. So, you know, please note that until 1951 on the eastern side, she is living and getting married in East Pakistan. She migrated in 1955 and she brought the sari with her. So that's something that we again noticed, that for a lot of women, they bring textiles. Like textiles hold a lot of importance for them. It's one of the objects that have been donated to the museum largely by women. Next slide. Utensils were the other important thing that women packed, because they knew that they would need to cook, they would need to eat, they would need something to eat in. These utensils have been donated by Sudarshana Kumari. The sewing machine has been donated by Mrs. Bhatia. Sewing machines were prized possessions in the 1930s, 1940s. They helped make work so much easier for women, and they were expensive. This is an Usha sewing machine, and this was also brought across from Bahawalpur. And after partition, as women started rebuilding their lives, often on their own without any other male members to support them, they were encouraged to turn to sewing, to embroidery, to knitting, to come into the workforce. So just, you know, the things that women brought across are things that are of immediate use, textiles, while many of the things that men bring across are related to their educational certificates, the property papers, the things that they would need to show to claim, to apply for claims. Next slide. This is a photograph from 1946 in Larkana. Now, after partition, there were a lot of changes that needed to be incorporated in daily life, in your daily life, your language, your food, your dress. Again, in Sindh, the kurta pajama, or a variant of the kurta pajama, was the regular dress. But when Sindhis moved to Gujarat, which is where a lot of the Sindhis moved right across to the east, they were expected to wear saris, and that was a completely different dress for them. It was uncomfortable. It was difficult to get used to. Next slide. So the changes in women's lives were to a much larger extent, in the sense that it completely upended the social and cultural living pre-partition. Women came, on the left you have a burqa that has been donated by Tikka Rani Jagjit Kaur Bedi. She kept strict parda up till partition, and in fact wore this burqa while migrating, while fleeing from Kallar Bediyan. But after she came to India, she never kept parda again, and she became more and more involved in the public life, in going out and, you know, moving beyond that. So for some people, for some women, of course, it might have been to a much lesser extent, but partition also resulted in some sort of an emancipation. But contradicting that, or in opposition to that, you also have the fact that the more women came into the public life, the more women entered the workforce, they were also exploited for their labor. And Ritwik Ghatak's films, most notably Meghe Dhaka Tara, looks at this aspect of the partition and of how it affected women specifically. Last slide, please. We'll end the talk here. I'll just end by saying that at the Partition Museum, we're making a deliberate and constructive effort to record stories covering all aspects of the partition. Women voices constitute an important part of it. a little bit of which we've shared with you today. So the idea was just to give a sense of the overall experience of from the women's perspective of the partition. So I'll end here. I'll just take a look at the questions.
Ganeev, thank you so much. That was incredible. I feel like personally for me, you really brought alive certain aspects of many of these women's experiences. So thank you so much for that. It was in parts, as you said, it was quite hard. And I can see that you're also slightly emotional as well while talking about these stories. So just to say, I invite everyone, all of the attendees who are here now, to please use the Q&A box to share stories of your own, to share comments, any perspectives that you have, questions that Ganeev can address. We're here for another 15-20 minutes at least. So there is plenty of time to talk. So do share your Q&A, your questions. And if at any point you find it hard to type out, just let us know in the chat box. You can write to either of the hosts, and we'll try and see if we can perhaps switch on audio for you, just for a few people, not for everyone. So go ahead, Ganeev.
Okay, so I'm just looking at some of the questions that have been asked. The first one is that, can you please share the names of the films just mentioned about the partition? I'm not sure. There were a number of them which were mentioned, and there have been many films made on the partition. Some of the ones that I mentioned were, there's Tamas, which is a film series that came out in the 1980s, that's on YouTube. There's also Khamosh Pani, that came out in the early 2000s, I think. Then there's Shahid-e-Mohabbat Bhuta Singh, which is in Punjabi. I think it's available on YouTube. The other films, I think there's Mammo, which is by Sham Benegal. And there was Meghe Dhaka Tara, which is by Ritvik Ghatak. That is in Bengali, but it should be available with subtitles. There's this second question. Women are also often the custodians of traditional songs, lullabies, ceremonial songs, etc. How did these songs travel with the women, if at all? Yes, so we are trying to collect the songs that were brought across the borders. And this is again something that only women have come forward with them. We haven't really heard about them from men. This is a question that we also try and specifically ask women. A lot of the songs that, even today we think of as the traditional Punjabi songs, Punjabi wedding songs, Chan Kithan Guzari Aain. These are all in dialects that are from West Punjab. I don't know enough if these songs were also commonly sung on the eastern side before partition. But it's important to remember that West Punjab was much more developed than East Punjab before 47. That is where all the educational institutions were. Lahore was the cultural center. East Punjab was not developed at all. It did not have schools. It did not have colleges. So a lot of the writers that came out, and I'm specifically talking about Punjab here, a lot of the writers that came out in Punjabi are people who were refugees. And so a lot of the literature that we have on the partition was written by them. And the same holds true for these songs, because the families that came from West Punjab, from the urban centers, most of them tried to settle in urban centers in India also. So they moved to Delhi to a large extent, and Delhi being the capital, again, that culture is what moved across into India as well. So I don't think I've fully answered the question. So songs did travel, and a lot of the songs that we sing today are those that have come from West Punjab. But whether they were also a part of the larger culture before partition, I'm not so sure. There are also a lot of stories from Bengal and Punjab, but the Sindhi experience is not as widely known. Granted that they came via the ship of Karachi Harbour and may have faced less violence, but what were their experiences? How did this shape their relationships, identities, notions of home, biases develop? I ask because I'm a daughter of Sindhi partition migrants, and I have always felt a strong anti-Muslim sentiment in my home while growing up, mostly from the women of the family and less from men. I always wondered what perspectives did they have to develop such perspectives. So at the museum, we have looked at the Sindhi experience of the partition as well. We have a separate section dedicated to that. In Sindh, the partition was much less violent than even Bengal. However, there was fear, there was violence. A lot of it started only in early 1948. In January 1948 is when Sindhis started migrating in large numbers. Up till then, Sindh continued to have a large Hindu population. And the violence started, the trouble started a lot more after the Muslims from UP moved to Sindh. And it was a question more of, trying to make a living, of economic issues, of restarting lives. These Muslims who had reached Karachi felt that, they had left everything behind, and here they were again facing Hindus. It was the same that was being faced by Muslims in Delhi, that when Hindu and Sikh refugees were arriving from from Pakistan in Delhi, they felt, why are Muslims here? They should be moved out. So that is when the violence started in Sindh in early 1948 to a large extent. Govind Nihalani, who is the director of Tamas, talks about the fact that one of his earliest memories is of seeing a man being stabbed from the balcony in his home. And that is something that has stayed with him throughout. I am not sure about the strong anti-Muslim sentiment being more present in the women of the family versus the men. That's not something that I have specifically looked at, so I wouldn't want to comment on it. I wanted to work on the theme of women in partition narratives for my PhD research. As a researcher yourself, could you share some points? I think it's just very important when you're interviewing women to to be in a space that is comfortable for them, and for that I think it's very helpful to be away from the other family members, especially male family members, but even maybe their daughters or their grandchildren, because you need to, for them to speak about some of the things that really affected them deeply. They need to be comfortable enough doing that, and many of them may not be that comfortable sharing in front of their family members. So I think creating that space for them to speak is very important. Asking, are there many women homes? Again, I think the story that I shared of Partition Kaur is a lady who has managed to go back and visit her children and her home in Karachi. But to a larger extent, I think, again, it is men who go back and visit. I would say that a larger percentage of the narratives that we have of people revisiting their homes is men who have gone back to visit. And perhaps it's because as a society, women don't speak up as much, don't share their thoughts as much, don't demand that, that they would like to visit their ancestral homes. So I think while women have visited their homes, comparatively, men, I think, have visited their ancestral homes to a much larger extent. Please share some must-read literature on, sorry, I think there's a question that please read some must-read literature on partition. I have read several, but would love to get some more recommendations. I'm not sure. I think one of the best places to start is Urvashi Butalia's The Other Side of Silence. It's a relatively easy book to read in terms of the language, not the stories. The stories are quite are quite difficult, but it's well written and it covers different aspects. There's also Gyanendra Pandey's Remembering Partition that is more academic, but it's really well written. If you read Punjabi, I really recommend Pinjar by Amrita Pritam, because I think it's from a women's perspective, written by a woman, and it's covering these stories that are hard to come by. And you know, when you're looking at it, literature, films, art is really important, because even though these are not first-hand accounts, this is the best that we have. And these stories had permeated into the society in the 1950s, 1960s. These were a part of the stories that were told behind closed doors. So all of that, to some extent, would have been reflected correctly in literature. And I really like Pinjar. I think it's a book that doesn't give easy answers. Besides that, to look at, if you're looking specifically at Punjab, there's Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed's book, which is a huge book, but it covers the whole situation in Punjab. There is Twilight in Delhi, but that is covering the years before partition in Delhi and leading up to Delhi. There is Anis Kidwai's In Freedom's Shade, which is also a great book. She lost her husband to an attack in Dehradun, where he was trying to work to keep the Muslim community in Dehradun. And she went to Mahatma Gandhi and said that, you know, I'm completely lost, what should I do? And he said, why don't you work for the refugees? So she, right from the beginning, did a lot of work with the refugees in Delhi, especially the Muslims who were being forced out of their homes here. And she worked with she worked a lot with the abducted women in Delhi and the surrounding areas. And it's been translated into English. So In Freedom's Shade, Azadi Ki Chhaon Mein is a great book. If you like any more specific references, you can always reach out to me separately. Why was the Sindhi community in Sindh largely remained impervious to the partition violence while Punjab stood ablaze? I don't think there's any one answer to that. One thing to keep in mind is that in Punjab, because of the martial racist theory followed by the British, a large percentage of the Punjabis had been in the army, in the British Army. They had just returned from World War II. They had their weapons with them. It was much easier to escalate the violence. Sindhis also say that, you know, their society was much more multicultural, much more secular. And to a large extent, it continues to be so in present-day Pakistan Sindh, right? Whatever remains of the Hindu population in Punjab in Pakistan is concentrated in Sindh. There are many syncretic shrines that people go to. If you see, even before partition, like this, there's not much difference between the Sikhs and the Hindus. There's no clear delineation of religious identities as such. So perhaps all of that played a part in it. I don't really know the answer to that, and I don't think there is any one answer to that. My father was a soldier escort and remembers an incident with women in Wells. He never got over it. My question is, how strong is the persistence of the notion of family honor and killing female family members now? And how do visitors to the museum respond to this? I think the persistence of the notion of family honor and killing female family members, I think, continues to be a part of our societies. We have honor killings happening on both sides of the border, in India and in Pakistan. So I think that continues to be a part of it. I think visitors, when they see these stories, and we have a separate section dedicated to the stories of the women, I think it's eye-opening for a lot of them, because as a society, we don't really think about the fact that women's experiences would have been different at all. So for that in itself is a new thing for many of the visitors to consider. And we encourage our visitors to go back and try and speak more with their with the female members of their family and try and get their stories, not just related to the partition, but generally about anything. If you're thinking, if you're talking about and just trying to collect your family story of where was the family during the 1965 war, or during 1971, or during at any different points of time that mark, or during the emergency, we try and encourage them to also ask their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunts that how did they face it, what were the troubles that they faced during that time. Both my paternal and maternal grandparents had to flee from present-day Pakistan, and I have heard so many horrific stories of them. Agree with 1232 comment completely. Having seen suffering and struggle so closely, do you believe we as a society can overcome this hate with the future generations? I think that we can. I believe so, because for one thing, the realization that I've had is that even when we interview people who lived through those times in 1947, a large majority of them don't hold anger and don't hold hate. Even Bir Bahadur Singh, who witnessed his father kill 28 members of the family, who saw 80 women jump into a well, he visited his village later. He was in touch with members of this Muslim family that they were very close to before 47, afterwards also. And he talks about the fact that, that was a bad time. And a lot of the people at that time react to it by saying that it was just a bad time. And today, if you look at it, you have a lot more, you have a lot more options, chances to interact. So you have Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi students going abroad in colleges, and they come together as South Asians there, right? You are facing the same racism, or you're facing the same troubles in cooking your food, and you make your closest friendships with people who come from the same cultural background as you. And I think that will help us move beyond. It's about interacting, knowing, learning about each other, and moving forward.
Ganeev, thanks again so much for sharing your experience. Clearly, a very, very rich experience that you have collected yourself from talking to so many people, from collecting all of these oral histories that you mentioned. And thank you also to our attendees for all of your really insightful questions. I know that this continues to be a story, I think, that the Partition Museum will tell. And thank you for bringing that history alive, for holding space for that. I think it's incredibly important for us as a nation to be able to continue to engage with those stories. So thank you, and thank you for your work.
Thanks so much for inviting us. And
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
To all our attendees, there is information about the other events that are happening later today in the chat box. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. And do please, when you have the chance once we're able to move about some more, do please visit the Partition Museum. I can say personally, I have visited it and it is a wonderful experience. So definitely do go visit. So thank you again, and happy International Museums Day. Bye everyone.